Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Hope you're doing well. So, I have been studying the RadFem philosophy for quite some time now. Engaged with them, tried to have long form dialogues, end up getting blocked. They're not a type of people that want their ideas challenged. They really just want you to be quiet and consume their content. They don't do very well with pushback. And I often share when I get blocked by a RadFem. And I'm not being rude, I can be rude in certain contexts, but I'm just really normal and asking them, what about this, or what do you think about this, and then block, block, block. So they're quick with the block feature on X and pretty much every platform you encounter them on. Instagram is almost instant. At least with X, if you go back on their profile, you can still see what they're posting. But on Instagram, you literally can't search them up. So you just have to stealth watch them. And also, they have books and such. I've been thinking of going back to the 1970s and reading some of the original founders of the RadFem philosophy and feminism in general movement type of books, but we'll see. Now, one thing I wrote here in my notes was that RadFems, they have this critique of gender roles and socialization, and they contend that gender roles are a social construct, and that being the case, they are tools used by the patriarchy that cause male supremacy and female subordination. They contend gender roles are not natural and not biological. So, what I found tricky about this is, in our modern world, we have water on demand. We can hire nurses. Now, maids, nurses, staff have always been something of the elite, but now it's easier than ever, although I would say be very careful. You have daycares. You have so many ways in which women can put their kids to be raised by other people. Okay? So, these women aren't breastfeeding. They're formula feeding, so it doesn't matter who the kid's with, the kid will have some type of powdered meal. Whereas when you're breastfeeding, that child needs to be with you. And yeah, you can pump. I have a pump that I rented from Kaiser Permanente. But it's still, you'd have to carry that with you to work. You have to transport your milk in a cooler. It's very time consuming, but worth it if you have to do that. But my point is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave you 2 bags to essentially feed your little baby. And when you do that, you realize the importance of you as a mother and how little time you have. So, as you're nursing, another kid wants to play, the other one's doing this, another one's doing that. Things become more tricky with time to cook, to clean, to do stuff, to pay bills, to go to the DMV, go grocery shopping. Things become more narrow in those months where you're breastfeeding exclusively, where they haven't mixed in a little bit of solids yet, and you then realize you are not as free as a man would be to just go and do whatever you want. And I see women complain about this. Oh, he gets to just grab his keys, go to the gym, he gets to just be free as a bird while I'm more saddled. Everyone will have their children, inshallah, grow up, leave the nest, and you have plenty of time to yourself. But there is a biological distinction between men and women when reproduction comes in. Even when you're pregnant, you don't want to go out and be a busybody. If your husband wants to go out and go hiking, sometimes you just want to have a good nap and a nice shower and relax. Your needs as a woman change through different stages of your reproductive life. So, your reproductive stages during pregnancy, labor and delivery, and then recovery, postpartum, and then your breastfeeding journey. And then when the child's 2 and they can go on more adventures with you, life opens up even different doors. So, gender roles, I'd argue, they are actually biological, because how many women, when you're dealing with a colicky baby, if the man said, no, you can go to the DMV, you're empowered, go on, just go on, go. go to work, do this, do that. You realize how many women are run down, burnt out, masculine, bitter, irritated, and hate their husband because they've had to take too much leadership positions. And they kind of see their husband as a useless idiot, a sort of slob. And so I find that to be quite telling. Because there was a book I heard the title and it made me laugh, and it said, How to Not Hate Your Husband After Children. And when you don't have children, it's easy to say what a man should do, what a woman should do, and the woman shouldn't have to do anything domestic, and it's a silly thing to think men should provide because you don't have any children, you haven't gone through the ringer yet, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has a way of humbling you with children, because when you're recovering and you're just like, especially those first 24 hours after birth, you're just like, what happened to me? What's going on? And you'll notice a lot of women cry. You realize how vulnerable you are, and if you don't have anyone to help you, you can see how lonely you'd feel, how depressed you'd feel. And today, in the modern world, because so many families are broken, husbands take on that role, which could have been taken by a flock of women in your family in the past. Whereas now, one guest gets to stay with you, and, that's usually your husband, and he's there to protect you from abusive hospital staff and mistreatment and all that, and to advocate for you. And he is your lion. And if you have like a wish-washy, pushover husband, in that moment when you need to focus on your healing and the baby, you want him to pick up the slack and protect and really stand his ground and be observant and help you with what you need. And so that, when you're with a man who's really secure in his masculinity, he's not a sort of effeminate male, you would see it's natural how you and him both fall into your roles as the days go on. And when you come home from the hospital and you're settling in, he has his role and you have yours, and you'll notice how you just want to nest with your baby, cuddle, be with your baby, breastfeed. And your husband puts on the work boots and goes to work, and he can go out there in the world with the traffic and the anxiety and all that, the pollution, whatever it is in the world, and you're at home in your little oasis, in your little nest, and you are just with your children in the moment, and you're cutting off a lot of unnecessary negative stimulation from the outside world, and you're in your own little world with your children, and that creates a more harmonious environment for your mental and spiritual health. And that is biological because you're the mom. You're the mom. You don't, if a chicken is laying on her eggs and some begin to hatch and some chicks are little popping up and she's sitting on there, that we would say that's a natural biological urge that the chicken has to do that, to rear her children. When you look at in the animal world, when an animal rejects, like for example, my grandma showed dogs. Sometimes she'd have a dog who struggled to give birth, so you had to take him to the vet, and then they do a C-section. They put the dog under. When the dog wakes up, they didn't go through the labor process. Sometimes they reject the puppies, and this is a huge problem. And you realize how many species would go extinct if mothers didn't have that natural biological urge to take care of their pups, to nurse them. And for example, it's when you get around animals, you see what is instinct, what is natural, what is biological, and when an animal deviates from that, you see what kind of chaos and problems it can cause, even though we create solutions to that, right? So my point is that the RadFems think just because they have modern amenities to kind of erase every duty they have as a mother, that somehow means that gender roles aren't biological. Now, a man can cook and a woman can cook. In the culinary world, you'll see all kinds of kitchens with males in them, and then at home it's the women. So it's really fascinating. But as someone who loves to cook, in my home, sure, there could be some nights where maybe you want to have some Chinese takeout, even though I can make my own. Sometimes you want to just have pizza, even though I can make my own. Sometimes it's just about speed, like you got home late, you don't have as much time, if there was a problem or something and you just don't have a lot of options to cook it, but you still want to have a wholesome meal, you can order in, pick up delivery, DoorDash, Uber Eats, you name it, and you can get that food. But I prefer to cook, and it makes me happy, and it prevents sadness and isolation in terms of just these isolating thoughts. When you're moving and you're working with your hands, I mean, it's a way to just distract yourself and not even have time to have self-pity or become melancholy like. So, as moms, when you're taking care of your baby and your children, if you don't find something to occupy your mind and you don't get enough sleep, you start to go cuckoo. You start to go a little nuts. And that's tied to our biology. And when you first come home from the hospital, you're going to cry, you're going to have emotions, and you're not going to want to have to finagle with someone over a parking space or with your landlord, or you don't want to have to go to fix the kid's bike down at the shop. You want your husband to kind of handle that stuff, because your body physically and mentally, you just need to heal and focus on you. Okay? For example, when I was recovering from my C-section, I'm focusing on healing. The whole world doesn't matter. My husband now have to pick up all that extra duties and put it upon his shoulders and be able to handle it smoothly without me even knowing what's going on. And to reverse that, like, okay, honey, I'm not going to breastfeed. Here's the formula. And, I'm going to go out and work, and you stay home and take care of the kids. I know Stefan Molyneux, who's a philosopher, he's a stay-at-home dad, which is fine for some people, but the kids are older, right? Which is a little bit more easier. But during the younger years, that just doesn't make a whole lot of sense. You got to really think, okay, what is going to make me feel like a woman? What's going to make me feel feminine? And see, because the liberals, the progressives, the American Democrats have changed what it means to be a woman, that a male in a dress can now be called a woman, what it means to actually be a female, to be a woman, to have that sort of essence to us at our very core, is erased. So you have a lot of confusion on women being able to even identify with themselves. Like, what does it mean? And so they get offended when you say this is a female issue, a woman's issue, because now anybody can claim to be a woman, right? Just a little lip gloss. You don't even have to have bottom surgery. You don't even have to be a eunuch. Although being a eunuch still doesn't make you a woman. You'll never be one. But it's a degrading of how special we are. Men are special and women are special. We are awesome. We are an awesome creation. And I mean, it's just fascinating how you have a dog, you get it neutered, it's still a male dog. You don't call it a female dog now that that's been neutered. But with humans, for some reason, a human gets neutered, becomes a eunuch, gets a rot pocket, now they are considered equal to us, and they get to just invade our spaces. Which is creepy, very creepy, Buffalo Bill. And so, it's not a surprise that so many women don't know what their gender role is. They don't know how to really embrace their female nature. And what I like about Islam is that it strictly, literally tells us the male is not like the female. And that's fine. We don't have to take testosterone and, put on this sort of facade to be just cutthroat Shiv Roy. Now, a good thing that I like about Islam as well is that it encourages us to stay in our homes. Yes, if you have to work to survive, no problem. But what I'm talking about is that we have this awareness of what a woman's role is. Gender roles are defined in Islam, and that is a great moral compass for us to ground us, and it's been the same for 1400 years. And with liberals, progressives, the American left, the American secularists, they can rewrite what a woman is willy-nilly. If you asked a liberal in the 70s what a woman is, it's much different than today. So they're always shifting and changing. This isn't something permanent. A lot of them have deep mental illness, and then their mental illness just spreads out into the world and causes a lot of chaos and confusion and dysfunctionality. Because their brains are dysfunctional, they cannot create a great map for us morally. And as believers, I would argue that to have the men lead is very beneficial. I shared on my community tab how Ukraine is having pregnant women fight. That's not empowering. That's pretty evil. And women have lost their feminine side to the point where now they want to put their baby at risk, and where men no longer feel the need to protect women and unborn children, but rather put them in boots, make them masculine, and not knowing when to surrender, not knowing when to flee. I mean, the fact that these women wouldn't find a way to get refugee status to leave the country or go to another part shows you they don't have any motherly instinct left. To go work for the military, make yourself a target while pregnant, you're not focusing on your baby. Your baby matters more than anything in the world. The army don't need you, and if they do say they need you, then they're a feckless military who doesn't deserve you. And if you lose your baby because of the stress and have a miscarriage, they're not going to care, and they're going to expect you back to work. It's ridiculous. So if you notice, when we start to mix what gender roles are, I think a lot of children suffer because they need their mom and they want that type of love. And I didn't have the archetype of a mother and father, and I know how painful that is. It'll be a hole that'll never heal. And so it's fascinating how some people will pretend like, not having a warm, loving, trustworthy mother and father, that it has no negative side effects. And if a woman is focusing more on serving in the military, her career, while the children are young, you feel really left out. It's quite telling. It's quite telling. So Islam has gender roles for us. It tells us how to socialize, okay? And they're not just made up things to suppress women, but in the end, the human soul has to be subordinated to something. We are slaves of Allah. We serve Allah. We submit to Allah's will, inshallah. And we're always working on that by not drinking. We stick to halal, stay away from haram. That's an act of submission. To be insubordinate oftentimes causes a lot of chaos. And when you see women who are always arguing with their husbands and they just don't get along, nothing really gets done. There isn't a lot of harmony. I have a neighbor who consistently argues with her husbands between the hours of 1 and 4 a.m. They're super loud, and it's really unpleasant. They can't just talk normally and fix their issues, because when I'm breastfeeding in the night, it's super quiet. We hear the crickets, so voices carry. And I don't hear the man's voice. That's what's weird. It's just her just ranting and raving. She's been like that for years. And, she won't, if she's so unhappy, she should leave, or she should fix the relationship. But clearly that type of, where she's trying to dominate him, quite clearly. And you can see how that type of anger and that she has for her husband probably, causes chest pains, a lot of misery and unhappiness, and she doesn't really get to take a deep breath, recline in that sort of feminine energy, and just be like, I'm going to focus on being pretty, I'm going to focus on knowledge, going to focus on soothing stress, there's beautifying my environment, educating the children. I'm not sure if they have children. I think they only have a dog. But she could use her energy towards something else, but instead she's constantly trying to be the leader in the relationship. How you fight with your husband says a lot. And when you're arguing with someone, even if you're right, how you try to prove to be right and how far you take the conflict says a lot about you. And in the end, men are the caretakers of women. We know that. Surah An-Nisa. It's clear. Now, we can come together, we can figure some things out. And look, pick a man who you think will be a good leader. See, I never had someone tell me this. If I would have been raised with Islam and this concept of male leadership, how much more enlightened I would have been concerning what is the purpose of a man in a marriage. In America, marriage is really just all over the place in terms of ideology. Oh, a man, what does a woman do? What does a man do? These things change, and Hollywood has really disrupted what is proper for a wife, what is proper for a woman, what is expected of a man, what is needed of a man, and now you've got a whole confused generation who some of them are just hooking up, spreading diseases, and getting abortions. The most recent stats, I think it was 2023, was 1 million abortions in America. That's insane. That's crazy. That means that 1 million women decided that the man they let mount them wasn't worthy of having children. They had rather execute the innocent, helpless baby than let it be born. I mean, it's pretty wild. That's the heartlessness, the malice, the cruelty, the vindictiveness, the treachery, the licentiousness of countless American women because of the culture. It's really quite sad. So, gender roles, even if you go back to vintage books, you can see this sort of graceful femininity. And sometimes you're going to go through sort of Wednesday period or a Morticia period of your life where you're a bit more nihilistic, cynical, and just not really into what your life's going through at the moment, and you're just more of on the goth side of happiness in a way. But in the end, you bounce back once things get settled out, inshallah, and then you realize what type of socialization creates a harmonious family, and how you have accountability that doesn't make you have low self-esteem, but makes you level up, become a better person, and learn how to apologize and take accountability and responsibility for your mistakes and how you made others feel. So the socialization that we get in Islam is way more beneficial than what a RadFem would argue. Because when women lead men, they don't really like those males. You can look at certain comedies from the 90s where the women were in charge. You can see they don't really like it. And then if you look at, for example, in your real life scenarios, how many criminal males will have tons of groupie women flocking to them. And then you see women who have a very high body count, they're hypersexualized, they get a good soft guy, and then they still put him through the ringer, use him, cheat on him, and, milk him for his money and then ditch him. So you're like, okay, they got the soft, nice guy, but they didn't really appreciate it. The girls who can get a soft, nice guy are usually virgins or women with like 1 or 2 body count, because they're still very soft. But if a woman's had 10, 15, 25 men, she usually doesn't treat the nice guys with a lower body count very well. It's usually a parasitical relationship, and she usually settled for him. The more you pay attention around you, the more you see some of these basic, as you say, antidotes. So, don't fall for the RadFem philosophy that, gender roles are a social construct, so we can invert everything, twist everything, and make it how we want. it's fascinating. The RadFems, they really want to dismantle religious gender roles. And, to be fair, a lot of the Christian right-wing women online, they twist gender roles as well. I mean, the amount of women who are showing cleavage with a cross on, which is like, it's such a contradiction, and how they hate the hijab, but they don't shame nuns. They are very deluded. They don't have a consistent ethics. Either they love modesty or they don't. Either they don't want to have OnlyFans or they have to stop thirst trapping themselves. The amount of Christian women who thirst trap online is astounding. Quite astounding. And when you tell them, like, don't you think this is a contradiction? Is that part of biblical gender roles? Is that something that Christians 200 years ago promoted? 300 years ago? 400 years ago? No. Okay? But for some reason, American Christians, they have also changed gender roles. And there's a lot of cosplaying as well. And so you get a lot of confusion. But in Islam, the fitra, the biological nature, that is a key point for us to understand our gender roles and what we're supposed to do. Right? Now, if a Muslim man is wealthy, he hires a maid, has a private chef, a maid, what are you going to do? That's it. But if they're a humble family and he's going out working 12 hours and the wife, she's a stay-at-home mom, maybe she's got some time, she can make something. It doesn't take that long to make food. I've made complicated recipes, and some recipes can take a while, but it all depends on the age of your child. Really. And what other children you have. And once your children become chill, they can play with their toys, or if they get into a nice rhythm, you can figure out a pocket of when you can cook, inshallah. But cooking is really important, and it's good if you take turns. Maybe on Sundays your husband grills, make something real nice for you, stuff like that. But cooking, both of you cleaning, right? So especially when you've had surgery or you're nursing the baby, in order for you not to get too run down and look too ragged, if he helps and picks up some things, that's great. And don't forget, you can also assign chores to your kids. Okay, chores are really important. And you can teach both the boys and the girls chores, because a boy sitting, putting his feet up, playing video games while the girl cleans everything is really odd. If you want the boy to be masculine, make him go do yard work. Make him do something hard. Instead of eating Takis chips and playing soccer on the PS4. So, point is that the way the RadFems want to socialize women isn't going to be in their benefit. It's actually going to make them exhausted and more naggy and more bitchy, because they always have to tell the man what to do. And then, you ever seen the stereotype? You ain't nothing. You ain't no good man. Like, these phrases from the past, from the 70s and the 80s and the 60s, these come from women recognizing a man with no direction, a man with no leadership, a man with no vision. And that's not attractive, that's not useful, and it puts the whole family at risk. Because, you're staking your survival on someone, you want them to be leaders. So, the gender roles being clearly defined, and there's going to be nuances within each person's relationship, right? But the fact is that you make it harmonious. But you also understand your biological nature. And you actually focus on it and say, you know what, I don't want to do this because it's just, I'm not into it. Like me, I'm fine with mowing the lawn. I don't mind, because I would do that as a youngster. But if I have to, I ain't touching any plumbing. That's disgusting. Like the toilet, gross. I'm not trying to do any of that. There's things that men do because they have a stronger stomach for it. And then there's things that I don't want to touch germs and I don't want to be around it. So, no matter which way you square it, Islam has gender roles, and then we have cultural expressions within those Islamic gender roles that are permissible and not innovations and not shirk. And so we should look to that. We shouldn't look to the RadFems. And don't let the RadFems confuse you on your ever-changing cycle of womanhood and motherhood. It's going to progress, you know. How you are at 16, 20, 25, 30, 35, 40, 50, 60, it is going to vary. And what you want and your role as a woman within the relationship, in your marriage versus with your children, within your society, this is all going to change and vary. And knowing your role helps you to know your goal. And it's more, it helps you not have an existential crisis by knowing your gender role. And this is really important for people. So do some self-reflection. Think about what it is that you need to fix or that you want to change, in terms of like, hey, talk to your husband. Hey, you know, I kind of want to take a more feminine position in the relationship. Would you mind taking on this task and then me not doing that anymore? You never know. You might slowly find yourself being less stressed, less of an octopus that feels out of the water. Think about it. Please like, comment, subscribe, join the blog.